What's up, guys? This is Kayla.
And Olivia. And today, for our podcast, the topic is going to be a little bit heavy. We do want to just, make you guys all aware of that. The topic we're going to be covering is something that a lot of people are afraid about, and it's unsettling to a lot of people. But hopefully, at least by the end of this, you guys can either feel a little bit more comfortability or at least a little bit of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Nicely
So, Kayla,
said.
take it away.
So, it's always sad when someone dies, right? Naturally, we're sad for ourselves. We've lost someone we love, someone who mattered to us. But most of us also think that in some relevant way, it's sad for the person who died. And baked into that reaction is this big assumption.
And it's a big one.
It is a big one. The assumption is that death somehow harms the person who dies. That death is bad for them, not just for us, those who are left in the world, but for the person who died. What does that really mean, though? If somebody no longer exists, can something really be bad for them? Is there even a them left to be harmed? Or maybe are we just projecting our feelings onto a person who no longer exists? In this episode, we're going to walk through both sides of the debate. I also want to note that for the sake of the argument, we are postulating that there is nothing after you die. So if there's no soul and no afterlife, then death isn't an experience, but rather the end of experience. But then the question becomes something like, is there a real sense in which someone can be harmed by death?
Just to preface this, I will be taking the stance that death is not a harm, and Kayla will be taking the stance that it is.
Right.
So, I'm going to get started. We're going to start with Epicurus, and he has two main arguments when it comes to death not being a harm. So the first one is you can't be harmed by something you don't experience. So he basically believes that negative sensation is the only form of harm. So the dead do not have any negative sensations because they're dead. So death is not a harm for the person who dies. Remember hedonism, that's the focus on pleasure and the avoidance of pain. This would kind of align with, or this would actually exactly align with that. But he also says, just to kind of like further shoot this home, while we exist, death is not present, and whenever death is present, we do not exist. Therefore, it's not something that we should be scared of. This isn't a whole second separate argument, but this is, I would say, like an addition to it. But all harms can be located at a specific time. At every time, a person is either dead or alive, obviously. So at no time when a person is alive does death harm them, because death hasn't happened and we've never experienced death. We have no idea what it is, so we can't be harmed by it. But on the flip side, when a person is dead, death does not harm them at any time either, because the dead do not exist to be harmed. In other words, death isn't possible to harm, or death isn't a harm to a person who dies. Because they're dead, so even if it is harmful, they can't feel it because they're dead. So there's a couple assumptions that Epicurus takes here. The first one is that all harm lies in sensation. And so, like I said, throwback to hedonism, for something to be bad for you, you must feel it.
It has to feel bad.
Yeah, it has to be.
Which seems
pain.
intuitive,
Yeah.
right? Especially the experience thing, it seems really intuitive to me personally. Like pain hurts because you feel it, or betrayal or cheating upsets you because you know about it, you experience it. Or like illness is bad because you suffer because of it. Like if something never touches your awareness, it doesn't seem like it can really harm you. So I think Epicurus has a good point here.
I would agree. If you just were to like look at this argument on paper, it's like, well, yeah, if I'm dead, how can death be harmful if I'm not feeling it? Like, that seems obvious, so therefore death isn't harmful. But obviously, like, things can never be that simple when it comes to philosophy.
So Epicurus' argument on why we shouldn't fear death doesn't seem to align with our general concerns about it and how we grow up thinking about death.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, when we fear death, it's not just about, like, feeling pain. It's more to that. There's like more. The end of existence. Like, right. That's what scares us.
So this philosopher Thomas Nagel, he agrees with this notion. And in 1970, he writes this essay called Death.
Great title to the essay.
Right, very unique.
And not at all, like, luring over your head. Like, if I saw that on a shelf of a bookstore, picking it up.
Right.
Light read.
Beach read, if you will.
Bathtub relaxation time.
All right. Nagel's core argument is that death is a harm by deprivation of the goods of being alive. So I'm going to go back to Epicurus' assumptions that he has integrated into his argument. What we just covered, harms have to be experienced by the person, and they have to be experienced at a certain time. So Nagel disagrees with this, actually. He says, he has a quote, "A man's life includes much that does not take place within the boundaries of his life," end quote.
Like, what does this mean?
So remember that Epicurus thinks that experience is all that matters, correct? Nagel is kind of saying some kinds of harm don't just happen like inside a person, but they happen in relation to other people or in relation to the world around them. Take being betrayed or deceived or cheated on by your partner, for example. These we all generally think are bad things. It's bad if you are cheated on. It's bad if you're betrayed. And Nagel thinks they're bad not just because of how they make you feel in the moment, but because they affect your relationships and like your place in the social world. So what's bad for someone isn't just about personal feelings or immediate experiences, which directly contrasts Epicurus.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything worse than socially not being accepted by the world around you? Nagel would say no.
True.
Nagel low-key the king of social anxiety. Nagel walked so we could run.
This all leads to his explanation of harm by deprivation. So a harm by deprivation happens when essentially someone loses out on something good in life. So this could be experiences, opportunities, relationships, anything that would have made their life better. If they lose out on that, that is a harm by deprivation. So to illustrate this, Nagel proposes an example. He says, imagine a man with a brain injury who is mentally an infant.
My dream.
Okay.
Shout out Hayden and the Oyster.
If you know, you know. So the man with the brain injury, imagine even that he's content, maybe cheerful in like a simple, unreflective way, just like an infant would be. There's no awareness of what he has lost, and yet most of us would still say that something really bad has happened to him. This is a harm by looking at the relation between his actual condition and then the condition that he would have been in had the accident not occurred. So Nagel connects this to death. He says, if death is harmful, it's not because death itself is bad or like painful in any way or negatively detracts from your experience. Death is harmful because it takes away the good things that you could have had.
Yeah, so take that, Epicurus. There's more to life than pleasure and pain.
Boom.
You thought that was over. So we have another Epicurean thinker here. His name's Lucretius. And he kind of pushes back at this with an idea of temporal bias. So temporal bias is the preference for one's future life over a past non-existence. So like even though it essentially is the same thing to not exist before you were born and to like no longer exist after your death, I think Nagel would say that there seems to be, like, intuitively a difference. Like, there's more to, like, death after our existence than non-existence before our life.
Right. Like, there's a reason we dread one of them, and then the other one is just neutral to us.
Yeah, the other one's just like, I wasn't born, who cares?
Yeah.
So if we're not afraid, or if our prenatal non-existence doesn't unsettle us, he would say that our post-life non-existence should not unsettle us.
Right.
To, like, further emphasize this point, he says, well, the idea is that before you were born, you had no sensations. You had no thoughts. You had no experiences. But, like, you don't think that's harmful. You shouldn't have a negative evaluation of time after death on this account either. Essentially, in a normal life, like, almost no one would say, I regret that I didn't exist for the 10 billion years before I was born. But someone would maybe be more likely to say, I'm really, really going to miss, like, out on 10 billion years after my death, I wish I could still be around. I wish I could still experience those things and continue my life. This is just a temporal bias that really has no validity behind it, he would say.
Right.
Ultimately, Lucretius would say that it is irrational to fear death because it is not a harm.
So you might think Nagel is being schooled here, but actually he does have a direct response to the symmetry argument, which is also an extension of his deprivation argument. This is also from his essay Death from 1970, and he presents this thought experiment called the past versus future surgery example.
Dun, dun, dun.
So imagine you must undergo a painful 10-hour surgery, and there are two possibilities here. Either the surgery already happened last week, but you don't remember it, or the surgery is scheduled for tomorrow. So just imagine this. You wake up in a hospital bed. You don't remember anything. You don't know what's going on. The nurse walks in. What would you rather her tell you? That you just came out of a 10-hour surgery, or that you're scheduled to go into a 10-hour surgery? Now, even though the first scenario is essentially the same as the second one, most people would strongly prefer having the pain in the past.
Especially since they don't remember it.
Right.
Yeah.
So that preference, as Nagel would say, shows that we are future biased about experienced harms, but he doesn't think this is irrational. Lucretius thinks this is irrational. We should disregard this bias that we have towards the future, and we shouldn't care about death. But Nagel thinks, no, this bias is actually sort of a fact of being human, and because we care more about future experiences than past ones, and death deprives us of future experiences, death can be a harm because it cuts off something we're rationally biased to care about, which is future goods.
So now we're at a place where we can all feel the tension, right? It couldn't even be cut with a knife, and we're still not really much closer to find a solution to if death is a harm for the person who dies. Perhaps the most important takeaway when it comes to death isn't about which side is right, but how these perspectives shape how we live. Moreover, how should we think about death? Ultimately, whether death is a harm or not, facing it changes everything, whether it be someone else's death, which would remind us of our own mortality, or our own death, which would be like an inaction of our own mortality. Thinking about it's going to cause some effects to us. So Heidegger, he introduces this idea of being towards death. So in everyday life, Heidegger says we live in the public world of Das Man, which Das Man is like, can be thought of like a broad anyone. So it's like people in general. So what one does, everyone does, like social norms in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we wear certain clothes because that's what's in style. Like, we buy Labubu's because everyone's buying Labubu's.
Because Das Man buys Labubu's.
We laugh at 6'7".
Because Das Man laughs at 6'7".
And because it's a sign of high intelligence. Das Man also, Heidegger says, can tell us what to think about death. We try to push this out of our natural, like, everyday existence. We either lie to ourselves and say, yeah, death happens, but, like, that's to other people. Like, we don't like to face our own mortality, or we try not to think about death too much. We try to distract ourselves with work, fun, pleasure, to cover up the reality of our own mortality, like I said. Essentially, we distract ourselves and act as if we have unlimited time. But Heidegger says that being towards death means that we should face death as though it is our most personal possibility, because it is. Like, that's one. Death and taxes, only two guarantees, baby. He basically says we need to face this head on. We shouldn't flee from death, but instead we should let mortality shake us out of conformity, or Das Man. And it is only by facing the inevitability of death that we can genuinely live. So when nothing is guaranteed and time is finite, everything becomes more meaningful, not less, which I think is honestly like a pretty optimistic take. I mean, regarding the situation, at least.
So, is death a harm for the person who dies? As we've seen, the answer really depends on what you think matters most about being human. If you tend to be more hedonistic, if you agree with the arguments of Epicurus and Lucretius, then death isn't a harm to you at all. Death can't harm us because if it is harmful, we wouldn't know because there's no subject left to feel it. And the only things that can hurt us are sensations, and death erases the experiencer. So why fear what we will never know, or never feel, or never suffer? But if it is what death takes away that you see as a harm, then it could still be bad for us. You know, like future friendships, future joy, future versions of ourselves that we'll never get to become.
Future concerts we won't get to go to.
Right.
Future memes we won't be able to see.
Right. So there are two pictures here. One says that death is nothing to us, and the other says that death is the greatest loss. Both in their own way make sense.